Welcome friends to another r/malicious compliance video. If you had one wish, what would it be? Mine would be for you to hit the like and subscribe buttons down below. And our first story of the day is by Master of the Abyss. I don't care if you throw up. Here's a short story on some school-related mildly malicious compliance from years ago. This happened when I was in the 4th grade here in the US. All my teachers loved me except one. Let's call her Mrs. Strict. She was always a sour old lady, and she was probably the only teacher that ever seemed to actively dislike me. I never did understand why. One day, partway through my class with Mrs. Strict, I began feeling nauseous. It continued to get worse, so after a while, I raised my hand to get the teacher's attention and told her I wasn't feeling well and needed to go to the school nurse. To my surprise, she told me no, so I told her that I thought I was going to throw up. But she said she didn't care if I threw up and I better not move my butt from that seat. And so I didn't. I just remember thinking, seriously? Well, I'm sure you can all guess where this went. For what seemed like the next several hours, but was probably only the next 5 minutes, I tried to just endure. I continued to get more nauseous. I couldn't really hear anything being said in class. I was getting hot and flushed. You probably all know that feeling. And then it happened. I threw up all over my desk. Note that this was an afternoon class after lunch, so it was not pretty and it was not small. I just sat there at my desk, puke everywhere. I think a couple of the kids near me were freaking out and jumped out of their seats, but I didn't move. At that point, Mrs. Strict yelled at me to get out of her class and to go to the school nurse. I kind of stared at her rather vacantly for several seconds, so she yelled at me again louder. I tried to tell her that she had told me I couldn't leave my seat, but I found I couldn't really speak yet after everything I had just threw up. I continued to stare at her for several more seconds with her not approaching me, and then I slowly got out of my seat and left the classroom. As I went through the halls up to the office where the nurse was located, I began to feel better. You know how you can sometimes feel so much better after you finally throw up? I imagine I was a bit of a mess as I passed through the office to the nurse's room because everyone stared at me. I explained to the nurse what had happened and included the part about being forbidden from coming to the nurse before I throw up. They had a sink and towels and things, and she let me clean up while she called my mother to come pick me up. I think that by the time my mother got there, I was feeling fine, but strangely enough, no one was inclined to let me stay at school for my last class. I'd love to give you some awesome fallout from this episode, but I'm afraid that I don't really have anything satisfying. My mother had some stern words with the school principal before we left, and I was told that if I ever felt I was going to throw up, I should leave class regardless of what the teacher said. I don't know what was later said to the teacher, but she had years with the school district, and it would have taken a lot more than refusing a sick student from going to the nurse to hurt her. Besides, I'm sure she just told them that she thought I was faking to get out of her class. I was too embarrassed about the whole incident to even bring it up with the other students the next day. As I understand it, she just had the students move away from my desk area while the janitors came to clean up. Without getting too much into the details, have you guys ever thrown up at school in any capacity? I'm afraid to admit, I think I've done so 3 times for some reason, and I'll add that all 3 times it didn't have like a precedent. There was no, oh, I'm feeling sick this morning, or oh, I definitely ate something bad. It always just seemed like out of the blue. So have you guys? Let me know in the comments down below. Our next story is by EKV88. This apartment is not good enough by our luxury lifestyle standard. This all happened 5 years ago while some of my friends were still in tourism college. How it works in my country is that you need to have a practical exam to literally spend your summer vacation working as a semi-intern paid under minimum wage. Though it's tourism, so they got to work on vacation, kind of. Their job title was something in the lines of house representative. Agency would make contracts with small apartment owners, usually 5 to 15 rooms, and they would resell their apartments in some tourist arrangements. My friends' jobs were to basically show guests around and be on 24/7 call if any of the guests ever needed anything. So in perspective, houses were scattered around the city, even cities, and it was sometimes very hard to get by them, especially as the agency was run by, as always, fat greedy guys who don't really care about providing, or rarely provide, any means of transportation. So when 2 guests would need something, it would take you an hour just to walk from point A to point B. So this is how one day-to-day operation would look for them. They had incoming new guests 2 times a week, I think, and the agency would usually transport people by plane and buses, so it would be just one big group. This is your apartment, there's the store, there's the beach, call me if you need anything. Easy as that 90% of the time. Though there was other more damaging groups or self-transport groups, as they call them. Those people were coming there with their own cars or whatever, and they would usually have time windows like in hotels. Check-in time from 12 p.m. to 4 p.m. Only difference, those houses don't have receptions. My friends were basically it. So the timetable was kind of more for them so they know when they'll be welcoming guests, that being 12 to 4. I know all of this as my friends invited me to get there, as it was a tourist location with the beach and it was really nice. Free stay as they had a spare bed in their apartment. I only had to spend money on food and nightlife. Also, I was kinda shadowing my friends while they were doing their work and usually eavesdropped from pure boredom. So one day they had to welcome guests at a very nice villa resort. It's on the outskirts of the city. Beautiful place. Expensive as freak, and some parts were still developing as it was kinda brand new. They had one villa finished and polished, others were missing some cosmetic or trivial things on the outside, but the rooms were amazing. It's 12 to 4 check-in time and we're waiting for 12 families. All of them are in their rooms till 2 a.m. and we're just waiting for one more so we can go our ways and have something to eat. As the resort was so expensive, we couldn't afford to eat there. It's 8 p.m. and the last family didn't provide their mobile phone. The only contact is a landline number from a different country. My friend and I were hungry like street dogs at that point. A third friend joins us and he has a vehicle this time as he's transporting some goods to another city. So he invites us to go with him so we can buy something to eat out of the resort. Of course, the moment we took a first bite of food, we were called by the 12th family that arrived kinda shortly after. We get back to the resort where they're waiting outside of the room in their SUV. So one thing about SUV, it was really expensive as you can imagine, brand new, but the registration read that it was registered in a small town. And if you know that place, you kind of immediately know they're a bunch of apes. In a more international perspective, it would be kind of like if Florida had family intercourse with Texas and they made small town. Before my friend was even able to say, "Hi, how you doing?" complaints started firing from the top to bottom all around. Insults, F-bomb, R-words, horrible language. The dude looks like he took a construction worker to Versace and gave him Mr. Beast's credit card. His wife was even worse than generic Karen in combination. It was doomsday. They had a complaint about everything, how everything's half done, that's not true, how there are, and this is important, cables hanging everywhere that their kid might touch and die. Those are their own words. How the fence around the villa was unfinished and there was a concrete machine next to it. That was the only one that's true, but who cares? They're not working at that time and it's just chilling in the back. Then he started talking about how he was working construction his whole life. It was obvious, as those people are notorious for selling their father's land and living large after, and how he doesn't want to see construction equipment anywhere near him. After all that, my friend asked him if he can show us where those cables are sticking. Those cables aren't, by the way, it was radiator pipes not connected to the radiator. As you're on summer vacation, I'm pretty sure it'll be hot enough without those. And yeah, the kid that can touch them and die was actually a teen around 13 to 15 and was just sitting in the car. We didn't see her while they were bombing us with insults, even me who was just a bystander, and told them I had nothing to do with this. The malicious compliance moment. Conclusion for them is that they're robbed, that this apartment isn't good enough by our luxury lifestyle standard, they want their money back, but we can't do anything about that, and the agency office is in another city 1 to 1.5 hours drive away. They forced us to drive there so they could follow us to speak with the owner. The moment we get there, they start with the same lunatic behavior, yelling, insulting everything, though this time in the middle of a very crowded city. What we failed to mention was that 2016 was a heck of a vacation year. Everything was booked to 2017, and we saw people begging for literal shad. We left the agency office before them. We had enough, but one of my friend's colleagues saw them sleeping in the tent beside the beach for the next few days, and we were sure they failed to find anything. So they probably had to turn around and go back home for another 1,400-kilometer ride with 2 borders. At the end, seeing them in the tent by the beach, you kind of feel a little bad for them, but they really did make the mess themselves. If I'm staying at some hotel or villa or whatever, and there's some construction going on, I just think that I'm unlucky at the time. I wouldn't go, oh, I demand there isn't construction equipment around me when I'm staying here. They were just too picky about wherever they were staying and ended up having to stay in a tent. Our next story is by X Danny Speed. Your internet is fine. You don't need an engineer. So I work for a company that provides VoIP/networking solutions and IT support. So I get this call from a well-known angry customer who also happens to be friends with the boss. To top it off, we usually only support businesses and not residential customers, but we sold him some internet on the cheap for his mother's house. The conversation starts with me saying, "Good afternoon," and Angry Bob jumps in with, "You sold us dodgy internet. Been trying to call all weekend." I say, "Sorry sir, our offices are only open 9 to 5 Monday to Friday, but let me take some details for you and I'll run some tests on our side and get back to you." He says, "My mother is 86 years old and is a vulnerable person and hasn't been able to watch TV." I say, "I understand that, sir, but if you give me some details, I can investigate this for you and get this resolved ASAP." He says, "No, just send an engineer out tonight." Currently 4:30 on a Monday, and then Bob ends the call. At this point, I go and speak to my manager, Big Boss, the owner of the company, get some background, find the details I need to investigate, and the lines are fine. Angry Bob calls again. "Are you sending an engineer?" I say, "I have to run some checks on the circuit and it's absolutely fine, so an engineer won't be able to do anything. If you tell me what the problem is, I can help you to try and resolve it over the phone." He says, "No, just send the engineer." I say, "Okay, but you'll have to accept potential charges if the fault is not with the line and is with the local equipment. I really think we should try some first-line resolutions first." Bob says, "No, send the engineer." 24 hours and a 270 British pound call-out charge later, Bob says, "The engineer didn't fix the internet. Why am I being charged?" I say, "As I previously stated, the line checks were fine, and the BT engineer is only responsible for line maintenance. It sounded like it was a local issue." Bob says, "Fine, you get down here and sort out the router. It has to be that router you sold us." I say, "I will have to clear this with Big Boss. Should we go over first line resolutions first, or at least give me a description of the problem?" Bob says, "No, I'll speak to Boss myself," and hangs up. The boss says, "OP, just to shut him up, would you fancy going to take a look? Usual charges would apply if it's not a fault with our equipment." I say, "No problem." So I go to visit the house. Luckily, Angry Bob isn't there, but his sister is, who's polite enough. It turns out there was an issue with their Android streaming box used to stream international channels. And since they were nice enough, I reconfigured that for them. They also had no other devices actually connected to the Wi-Fi, so I connected the house up, including their security system, etc. The best part of this is I could have talked him through all of this, as it's very simple stuff, even though they aren't covered, and would have taken about 10 to 15 minutes, but he ended up paying over £500 in call-out charges. You gotta love the good old PEBCAC errors. That meaning problem exists between keyboard and chair. I don't blame people too much if they're not very technologically savvy as far as not understanding why something isn't working. The real problem is they didn't want to cooperate at all, they just wanted somebody else to do everything for them. You might as well go and hire like a handyman service or something like that. And our final story of the day is by ASCII Forever. Technicians have to account for non-repair activity. Alright then. Back in the previous century, I was part of a field service department for a computer company. We had service engineers all over the country, most of them working from home. When they weren't working directly on customer service calls, they did tasks like low-level repairs on spare parts, shipping bad parts to our logistics center, catching up on paperwork, all the routine stuff. We basically just used our billing as a measure of whether we could support a remote tech in any one area. We didn't worry too much about how many hours each tech was working since it varied by area and changed from month to month anyway. I was assigned for my regular job to help implement a tracking system so we could gather metrics like travel time, TTR, parts used. System had an inventory module with an eye into making this into a billing system later on. We were doing all the billing by hand, actually on Lotus 123 spreadsheets. Then we had a change of senior management who decided our remote techs weren't working enough. We needed to have them working at least some number of hours per week at a minimum. We explained that not all their work was tracked. Only the actual time at a customer site and travel. None of the admin tasks were recorded. They didn't care. We needed to prove we needed each tech. How much money we billed didn't matter. This is where the malicious compliance comes in. I was the project manager between the service department and the programmers that maintained and improved the tracking system. My company had bought the source code from the vendor. The various service managers came to me worried that they would be forced to lay off some of the techs if we couldn't figure out a way to capture the extra tasks these folks were doing. So we figured out some broad categories of things the techs did, and I created change requests that I sent to programming staff to implement. These were easy for them to implement, and we then explained to all the field techs that it was in their interest to report as much stuff as possible. You mailed a package to head office, create a ticket and close it with time recorded. Another tech needed some phone support? Same thing, create a ticket. You needed to fill our expense report and/or timesheet? No problem, just create a ticket. Needless to say, all our remote techs magically became busier, and the bean counters were satisfied. And of course, our billings didn't change one iota. It was a total waste of time and more work for our dispatchers, who had to open and close these additional service calls. But sometimes you just have to do silly things to keep the bosses happy. Stories like this is why I have a great appreciation for workplaces that understand that performance is what matters and not the hours put into it. Any place that says, get this done in this amount of time, I don't care how long it takes you to do it, I have a lot of respect for. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. So of all these stories I've read today, which is your favorite and why? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you haven't yet, if you could like and subscribe, that would mean a lot to me. Whatever you do, whether it's liking, subscribing, turning notifications on, all of it helps grow this channel and I appreciate the heck out of it. So until next time, I'll see you all tomorrow with some more stories.